Well, welcome again to the Hats of the 20th Century Museum, Hats and More. And today we're going to try to start looking at some hats. These hats, these old beauties, have been in tubs packed away in the dark for 10 years nearly. So it was almost like Christmas for me to get them out and lay them on the tables. I used to take these hat shows on the road. When I did that, I had a 20-foot line of tables, but we're space confined here to just this small area. So we'll put these away and bring out more another time. So anyway, I'm going to follow my notes. Oh, and tell you what a wonderful adventure I'd had buying these hats. I went to antique stores and consignment shops, thrift shops, garage sales, anywhere I could find a hat and a bargain. And that's the way I found hats from the 1900 period right through to the year 2000. So we're going to start at the beginning here at 1900. So these are some of my oldest hats. And when I used to do programs, I would say, and to show that I'm not just talking through my hat, I put together scrapbooks from period magazines, catalogs, things like that from the actual 1900 decade. Now, I can't pass these to you, as I used to the audience watching, but we might pick these up occasionally because I've marked a few things I'd like to show you. I actually did this to save on the pages of my old catalogs and magazines. When you look at what was on the pages of a 1902 catalog, you know that that is really what was in style in 1902. It wasn't up to somebody's interpretation. So it's the real deal, these things. And I might say that I learned the actual history of these old hats by going to the library, the old-fashioned way. No Googling 25 years ago, so I had to hitch up the horse and buggy and go into town and sit in an actual library to do my research. So, okay, now, let's talk just a little bit of some general information, like the word millinery. Most people know that millinery refers to ladies' hats and accessories. And the word came from the nice articles that were being produced in Milan, Italy in the 16th century. So therefore, Milan millinery. A milliner is someone who designs, constructs, and even sells a hat. They're all milliners. The gal behind the counter, she's a milliner. Haberdashery, on the other hand, refers to men's hats and accessories, and even clothing. They're sold by a haberdasher, but they're made by a hatter. A hatter is the man who designs the hat and constructs it, and even works on making the felt. They are all hatters. So, and we're all familiar with the word as mad as, or expression, as mad as a hatter. And it seems like a bit of silly fun, but in my research at the library, I found that it had a rather grim origin. So we'll get to that later, but it's all because of felt, so let's talk about felt a little bit. Felt can be made to be rigid and hold its own shape as this old costume hat. A nice rigid felt that was steamed and molded into that shape. Felt can also be soft and used like fabrics. Kind of a hat weight here, but still something you could sew. Felt was, felt is something like fibers that are mixed and compressed together to a desired density and durability. That's how you get the different types of felt. And if wool is used as the fibers that you're compressing into felt, you have a wool felt, very common. But if fur is added into the mix, removed from the pelt, then you have a fur felt. And a fur felt is very highly prized and usually much more expensive. But why the expression as mad as a hatter? Well, felt had been around for centuries, but the trouble began in the mid-1600s when they started using mercuric nitrate to help remove the fur from the pelt. It was a wonderful technical advancement, but prolonged breathing of this chemical caused mercury poisoning. So fellas who were mixing the felt started to have memory loss and slurred speech, kind of like me right now, mental derangement, paralyzing effects, and even death. So life for a hatter at the felt mixing end of things was a downward spiral. And from that, an unkind society came up with the expression as mad as a hatter, something you wouldn't want to be. And of course, these men that had these jobs were of the lowest social class and couldn't find much other work, so they were sort of required to find employment, and that was what they did. Well, I should say too that in mid-1600s, our biggest hat factory in this country was in Danbury, Connecticut, and there the condition was called the Danbury Shakes. So it was a real thing. Eventually, hat making became a little more technical advancements. It became safer and a lot less dangerous. But for a long time, it was a dangerous thing, and a lot of men paid a heavy price. By the mid-1800s, the expression began to mean that you were just a little eccentric, like the Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland. That was a good example of the new meaning. And I'm hoping that that's still the meaning, because I get called mad as a hatter quite a lot. So now here we could also talk a little bit about a couple of other things that are important to hat making. Well, buckram. Buckram is a heavily sized cotton fabric, sized with glue, used for shaping the body of a hat. It adds a lot of strength. And if you pass a little steam through it, you can mold buckram into nearly any shape you need. It's very important to hat making. Let's toss that aside. Of course, buckram came in black and white, and it also came by the yard. This is a huge piece of buckram that came from the 1960s, so it's almost an antique too. That would be 50-some years ago. In the 60s, women were all doing millinery in their own homes, and there was classes they could take, so I know that that was from the 50s because I know the lady I got it from. So anyway, what else have we got here to talk about before we actually look at a hat? Let's talk about some customs at the beginning of the century. Okay. Oh, people at this time period always wore hats. It was essential. You would no more go outside without a hat or go somewhere without a hat than you would without shoes. It just wasn't done. And in fact, the people at this end, the older people, could even remember a time when wearing hats indoors was the custom too. So wearing hats was a serious business. So maybe the late 1800s, mid-late 1800s for sure, would be the age of this hat. Affluent fathers and grandfathers would relax with a pipe and slippers in the evening with a smoking cap. Little pillbox hats. Now maybe you want to come in a little closer here. Usually made of velvet or satin, usually made by daughters and wives, and decorated with embroidery and a tassel. And this old beauty has actually got a name in it. It looks as though it says O. Young. So I don't know, was it Oliver Young? Was it Otis Young? But a very old smoking cap. There we go. And women, like Whistler's mother in the famous painting, were known to wear lightweight indoor bonnets, kind of to keep their hair in order and kind of as a form of modesty. Hair wasn't something that you flaunted around at that time. You kind of kept it covered. And also, I don't know where to put these things. And it wasn't a matter of warmth, these indoor customs, but in winter, when it was a matter of warmth, women would wear sleeping bonnets, and that went on for a long time, but that would keep your head warm at night. And even men. The gentlemen would wear a sleeping cap, much like we've seen in the poems of The Night Before Christmas. So there's our indoor bonnets. But by this time period, indoor bonnets and things were kind of out of style, and but you still wore a hat. It was absolutely required. Now, I should say that at the beginning of this century, we were coming to the end of what was called the Victorian period, a period of time that was named for England's Queen Victoria, who had reigned for 63 years. And that was a period of very elaborate decoration, yards and yards of fabrics and lace and whatever. It just went on and on and on. But by the turn of the century, all people, all women wanted to look like the newly created Gibson girl. This is artwork by Charles Dana Gibson in the 1890s, and she was beautiful. Now, I've got a couple other examples of how everyone wanted to look like the Gibson girl. Hey, this is when I'll go to my book here. Let's see if I can find her quickly. Here's a Gibson girl. She was young and beautiful. She had upswept hair. There's more pictures of her. Tiny little waist, very young, vital, athletic, liked to golf, play tennis, that type of thing. So everybody liked to look at her, looked like her. Now I want you to notice this corset. This is a straight front corset to give women a special shape at this time period. And I also want you to notice this scarf. That's by Harrison Fisher. Scarving, tying your hair in scarves for swimming. That'll come up later. Okay, so while we all wanted to look like the Gibson girl with her beautiful posture, because posture was very important in 1900, all women wanted to have good posture and possibly achieve what was called the S stance. This is an unnatural pose that was popular at this time, in which women would throw their hips back, as it would say. So you would kind of throw your hips back, and then aided by a slight bustle in the back, not a big one anymore, but a slight one, and the new pigeon-breasted bodice, which that corset helped you achieve, you could achieve what was called the stance, the S stance, which was considered true beauty by everyone, although it was a very painful way to stand. I could say, too, that this Gibson girl, she was the epitome of beauty for 20 years. She started in 1890 and lasted for another 20 years. So anyway, so when Queen Victoria died in 1901, her son Edward took the throne. And the style period that emerged during those years were given his name. So that's what we started to have. These are kind of curled up, and I'm sorry for that. The 1910 decade, the styles were decidedly less fussy. The slim skirts got slim, the bustle was gone for good, and standing in a normal upright position was considered a good thing. No more throwing your hips back. And this took us through the Titanic tragedy of 1912, which we all remember. And I mentioned that because Titanic changes were coming in fashion. Through the 1910 decade till we hit the 20s, this is what happened. The corset was gone for good. The waistline dropped to the waist, so you could be just as straight as you wanted to be. The skirts rose to the knees, so your legs were on display. They became very important. And it's just an illustration of how in 20 years we had the biggest changes, titanic changes in fashion in this 20 years. So I found that very interesting to look at. There we go. So now we kind of have a little sense of fashion. Okay, you know what? Check my notes again. I think we're ready to look at some hats. There we go. And we'll start with the first one here. Is an old sunbonnet, which is called a slatted poke. And this sunbonnet is very special to me because it had belonged to my Grandma Sophie. In 1900, she was a young mother with children. and a large vegetable garden. They were farmers. She was doing a lot of help in the field too. You can see how faded this old bonnet is by looking at the interior. Now it's called a slatted poke because the brim pokes out beyond the face. So poke. Slatted refers to the slats of wood or heavy cardboard that was sewn into the brim to keep it rigid. And this business along the back that kept her neck from sunburning is called a havelock. And that's named for the English general who came up with the idea for his troops when they were stationed in the hot desert climates of the 1800s. So that's a havelock, and that's still around today. Now let's see. We got one hat, and we're kind of at the stopping period. You know what? I'm going to do one more hat, though. Let's do this one, because she's quite old. This is a style that was in the 1890s and came right into the new decade. I mean, should say the new century. Pretty little thing, fussy little feathers, cherries that are in a pretty darn good position, or they're not broken yet. Cracked into places or two. These little hats were always perched on the top front of your head. Very stylish. Now I'm going to take the pin out, which I have to admit, I just jab right into her head. Well, we've even got some wings on the side, little ruffles that are very sad and old, but still very cute. Bustle in the back. Now the underside is adorable. The color gets brighter. I can't read it and show it to the camera both, but there's the name of the company, with a little gathered in the center type of lining. 2 rings, wire rings for support, and a little band at the back where you could stick in the hat pin to secure it into your hair. They're starting to get away from bonnet wearing with ties all the time, so these little hat pins became the new thing. And these little 5-inch hat pins, these two are actually antique. They came stuck in with the hat. So anyway, very adorable. And because we want to kind of keep these shows at 15 minutes, we'll stop right there and start again. So thank you very much. We'll see you next time.